Welcome to Wesley Impact. This is a television program of Wesley Mission where we do our best to share with you the work that we do every day of the year, both in our community services and across our congregational life. I enjoy spending this time with you all, and I'm glad that you're with us today. A little later in the program, I'll continue my message filmed at Easter time earlier this year and look at how Jesus interacted with four of his disciples, in particular John, Judas, Thomas and Peter. Later today, I'll look at how Jesus interacted with John. Now, over the next couple of weeks, I'll be joined in the studio by a good friend and colleague, John Dickson. John is a university lecturer, public speaker, author, media personality, visionary and advocate for the Christian faith. In the 1990s, he started as a singer and songwriter in a rock band. And over the last 30 years, he's written 18 books, hosted a number of documentary series and delivered hundreds of lectures. I'm pleased to say that John is with us today. Welcome, John. It's fantastic.
Privilege, mate. Any chance to chat with you.
Yeah, it's great to have you with us. So where did it all begin? You tell us a bit about your journey into the Christian faith. How did that start?
Well, I was a typical kid growing up in Sydney with no religion. My parents, when they met, apparently, Sunday was the only day they could get together. So my mum, who was attending church, blew it off, and Dad gave up the races, and they just hung out together on Sundays and never went back. So, when they eventually had kids, there was just no religion at all. We didn't say grace around the meal table. They never sent us to church or anything like that. But I did have a scripture teacher in my public school, right, in year 9, when I guess I was 15 or 16, who was smart and funny and gracious and put up with our antics. And it was really through her, this sort of middle-aged mum who volunteered to come to my school and talk about Christianity, that captivated me. Now, she did something that would now be illegal, so I'm not recommending it. She invited the class to her home on Friday afternoons for hamburgers, milkshakes and scones. So we turn up at her home every Friday afternoon, ate her food to the point where we were, so full we could hardly get up out of the couch. And then she'd open a Bible and she would say, "Have you got any questions?" And I found myself, along with 3 or 4 of my mates, thinking Jesus was incredible, a weird blend of power and tenderness. And I found myself utterly drawn to him. And I think I would have said after 6 months, I was a fan of Jesus. After a year, I was a follower. But the thing that this woman always sort of drilled into us was a sympathy for those who don't believe. A really tender, humble approach to those who don't believe. And we threw everything at her. I mean, not just our tricky questions, but our antics, She put up with a lot.
Yeah.
And I think this set me on a course that's what Christianity is like in society, or is meant to be like. And I guess this is all to say, I feel that she introduced me to Jesus, who was just like that, and that has always been the aspiration of my life, whether it's singing or writing or academia, to be full of conviction, but always try and meet it with compassion.
You went from being a lead singer in a rock band to being an academic, being a minister of the gospel. I mean, talk to us about that journey.
When we became Christians as 16-year-olds, we just started a band because we thought, wouldn't that be a great way of, making Christ public through our music? And we did that for years full time. And I eventually got to the point where I felt it's one thing to be loud and impressive and be able to tell funny stories from the stage and point people to Christ. It's another thing to really know what you're talking about. And I got to the point where I felt I was shallow. And that's when we, as a band, we disbanded and went and did a theological degree. And from that, I went into, I enrolled in a master's and then went into the PhD program. But for me, it was never because I wanted now to be an academic, not a singer. It was all just the same thing. I just wanted to make Christ public. So yes, it feels odd to have, had the whiplash of touring the world with my best friends to learning ancient Greek, but actually it's all because I want to make Christ public.
So why history?
Well, I sometimes feel every Christian is committed to history because uniquely Christianity is an historical faith. It's about events that took place in time and space. So, you stop and think, well, what are our central scriptures? They are the Gospels. They're the first 4 books of the New Testament for a reason. But what are they? They're historical biographies. So our faith is centred on a real person who said things in a certain context. We meet other historical characters like Pontius Pilate, or Caiaphas the high priest, and so on. So we're already committed to history. But I found myself, when I was learning theology, constantly thinking about the history. And I had to weigh up what would be better for the people that I want to communicate with. A deeper understanding of ancient history would be great. And that's been my life's focus. So it's partly because Christianity is historical and partly because I want to make Christ public.
John, stay with us, but we're going to talk about the number of books that you've written, including your most recent one, which I love, which is Bullies and Saints, which is really a deep dive into some of that Christian history. We'll be back in just a moment.
If you would like to learn more about Wesley Mission, visit wesleymission.org.au. You can find help in our community services, connect with our church and congregations, discover a volunteer role that suits you, stay up to date on the latest news and information, donate to support our work, and help make a positive difference in your community. You can also connect with us on social media and subscribe to receive the latest news and information about Wesley Mission directly into your inbox. Visit wesleymission.org.au.
At Wesley Mission, we're always ready to roll up our sleeves and lend a helping hand however we can. So please be in touch if we can be of help to you, your family or friends in any way. My guest in the studio today is university lecturer, public speaker, author, media personality, visionary, advocate, all-round great guy, John Dickson. John, your first book was published in 1993 and there's been a long list of them ever since. You've explored world religions, you've explored themes around suffering and pain, and there seems to be a consistent thread that runs through many of your books, if not all of them, and that is looking to answer hard questions. What drives that?
I just know that people who aren't Christians aren't idiots. They have real questions. And when you sit down with people who don't believe and genuinely listen, you can see that actually they've either had a bad experience that has put them off the faith that's real, or they've seen some TV documentary that caused them to doubt the historicity of the Bible or whatever. They have their reasons. And I've just always felt a real affinity with that sort of person. And so that's, most of my speaking has been to that kind of audience. Even the books I've written for the Christians are really about trying to help them help their friends who don't believe understand what Christianity is about. And I am more than ever convinced there is no question you could put to the Christian faith that the Christian faith doesn't have a ready answer to. You might have to read a book about it. It might take some time.
Or 3.
Yeah. And Google might not be your friend in getting the answer, but the answers are there. Christianity's been around a long time. A lot of people have thrown rocks at it, and it's still standing tall, smiling sweetly back at the public, saying, come and investigate.
So a double-barreled question for you. Are any questions off limit? And
No.
But here's the follow-up. What's the one that gets asked that you find the hardest to give an answer to?
Oh, that's easy. There is no question that's off limits, but I think the hardest question is judgment. Hell. That is the trickiest of the questions that I get asked. I do think there are ways of responding. I think part of the problem is when they hear the word hell, they're thinking of like a Simpsons episode, or
Dante,
or Dante, if they're cultured, or a Monty Python skit about hell and the devil and burning sulfur and so on. And that, I agree. I don't believe in that kind of hell, but I do believe in the hell Jesus taught. And so part of it is trying to take away the cultural baggage attached to these questions and then move them back to the figure of Jesus.
So 2 of your books, the Christ Files and also the Life of Jesus, we're turning to documentary series. I mean, wonderful How did that come about? I mean, so you're an author, but now you're also a presenter, a TV presenter as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was in some ways accidental. So I'd done my studies, and so writing about the evidence for Jesus was easy. I loved it. It was my favourite academic topic. And then a group asked me if I would front a TV show on the book, Christ Files. And then off I was on this incredible journey around the Middle East and Egypt and Europe, handling the oldest manuscripts of the New Testament in the archaeological sites from Jesus' life. And it got to the point where I am quite comfortable in front of the camera now. Some people might say too comfortable. But so long as it's the subject, this the life of Jesus, the evidence for his existence, and so on. The history stuff lights me up, so I get very excited.
John, your latest book, Bullies and Saints, is one of my favourite reads of the last couple of years. I've really enjoyed reading it. Read it cover to cover in a couple of days. What drove you to write this particular book?
People's questions. Yeah, so more than 10 years ago, I was involved in a debate, big public debate, about we'd be better off without religion. And my side was trying to argue, no, we wouldn't, we need Christianity. But we lost spectacularly. And I came away that night thinking, a lot of people think we'd be better off without Christianity. Their main thought about Christianity is that it damages life. And I mean, you and I who mix with the church, and especially you with the work of Wesley, know that that's impossible. Like the gracious care that a place like this offers the world is the best answer, right? But there are still a lot of people who just think Christianity has raped and pillaged and started wars and tortured people, and that's it. You give Christians power, and that's what they'll do. So that set me off on a sort of 10-year adventure to really understand the history of the West, century by century. Look at what the church did every century. And I came to have a deep sympathy with those who think we'd be better off because the church has done some terrible things. There's no hiding that. But there are untold stories, myriad untold stories about the self-sacrifice of Christians and of church leaders. And so my book is an attempt in 300 pages to do that century by century account of both the bullies, who are many, and the saints, who are innumerable.
Yeah. So as you've done that deep dive, have you been on that 10-year journey, is there one particular moment in church history that you particularly lament and one you particularly celebrate?
Well, I could do that for every century. I mean, that's almost the experience of writing it. In every century, there's something I just so lament, and there's something that I absolutely love. And one of my favourites is to contrast two really significant figures who lived at exactly the same time, and both were bishops. One was a bishop in Milan. His name is Ambrose, and so we're like 370s AD. So Constantine, the emperor, has become a Christian. It's now 50 years later. The church is gaining power. And the first full-on Roman senator becomes a church bishop and acts like a Roman senator. Now, not to diss Ambrose, because some of our viewers will think of him as a saint. He is officially a Catholic saint, right? But he was also a bit of a bully. He was really harsh with pagans, really harsh with heretics. And he approved the burning down of synagogues, for example. But at the same time, over in Cappadocia, to the east, sort of Turkey, we would call it now, you have Basil the Great, who was one of the great theological intellects, but one of the most practical-minded people. And he had this great idea: let's use our wealth to start a free public hospital. And he ended up establishing this centre that had a place for the elderly, for lepers, for foundlings, because still Romans were abandoning their infants. The Christians looked after them. And a full-on public hospital available for everyone, free of charge. That idea of Basil's, to use the power of the church and the resources of the church to serve the most vulnerable, spread like wildfire, so that in a couple of centuries there were literally thousands of hospitals. Something we now take for granted.
Yeah.
Walking into a public hospital, you have Basil the Great to thank.
John, we're going to continue our conversation next week, talking about your work with Centre for Public Christianity, your work at Oxford, Ridley, other places. Such a wonderfully diverse portfolio of things that you do, and we're looking forward to that conversation.
Thanks.
We're going to continue with John next week, but I'll be back in just a moment.
I think people are amazing. We can turn dark to light. We can fly through storms. We can change worlds, but we can't always do it alone. If you need help, we could work together. Find out more at wesleymission.org.au. We are here for you.
Please contact Wesley Mission if we can help you, a friend or a family member in any way. We are here for you. I'll continue now my message filmed at our annual Easter breakfast outreach earlier this year. In this message, I'm looking at the way Jesus interacted with 4 of his disciples, in particular John, Judas, Thomas, and Peter. Today I'll focus on John and look at what we can all learn about God's love for us all. Let me first go to John. John, the beloved disciple, or in his own self-description, the one whom Jesus loved. Or as I like to call him, John the Insecure. You might remember the story. Not long before this meal, John gets his mum to him and to his sibling James, to go to Jesus and to say to Jesus, Jesus, when you enter into your kingdom, can my boys sit at your right hand? Can they have the place of authority? He was a bit of a mummy's boy, John. And we see this insecurity coming out, even in his own writings. And when I think of John, I think of those seasons, those times, which still can afflict all of us, of our own insecurities, myself included. Even if I concede that God is real, why would I believe that God loves me? As John was later to profess. One of my favourite books is a book by a man who was a Catholic priest, Brennan Manning, The Ragamuffin Gospel. And Brennan Manning has a remarkable story. He grew up in Brooklyn and his best friend was Ray. And Ray and he did everything together. They went to school together. They double dated together. They bought their first car together. They went off to war together. And whilst at war, they were in a foxhole. And they were reminiscing about life back in Brooklyn. Ray was eating a chocolate bar. And as they were reminiscing, a live grenade fell into the foxhole. And just in this moment in time, Ray dropped the chocolate bar he was eating. He smiled at his friend. And he dropped himself onto the live grenade, which exploded, killing him instantly, but saving his friend. Now, Brennan Manning, that wasn't his birth name. It was a different name altogether. And later, after returning without his friend back to the US, he became a Catholic priest. And when he was priested, he had the opportunity to take on the name of a saint. And when he was given that opportunity, he took on the surname of his friend who had died rescuing him, Brennan. And so he became Brennan Manning. And sometime after he was priested, he went and visited with Ray's mother. And they were reminiscing about the shared childhood that Brennan had with Ray. And at one point, later in the evening, Brennan Manning turned to Ray's mother and said, "Do you really think he loved me?" And Ray's mother came up, stood before him, shaking a trembling finger in his face and said, "What more could he have done? What more could he have done?" This table, what it depicts prophetically, what we celebrate this week, settles the question once and for all time and for all people whether God loves us. See, God's love, we don't have to strive for it, earn it, plead it, or pay for it. God's love is a gift freely given. It's received with empty hands and a receptive heart. You know, Jesus, in his farewell discourse to his friends at this table, he said that greater love has no one, that they lay down their life for a friend. But here's the really interesting thing. Jesus didn't just lay down his life for his friends, he did it for enemies as well. Because at the table, not only do we have John the insecure, we have Judas the enemy, and you might not be able to see him, but he's in the shadows here in the picture that Da Vinci paints. He's in the shadows with a little bag of money in his hand, a spilled salt shaker in front of him, the ancient symbol of betrayal. And here's the thing that I find hard to comprehend. Jesus, who's prophetically enacting what will happen over the next couple of days, he knows that the betrayer is at table with him, and yet he invites him, he welcomes him, he draws up a place for him at his table. This is prophetic theatre. This is a story in time and a story for all of time. Because you see, Jesus invites Judas and he invites us. He welcomes Judas and he welcomes us. He extends hospitality to Judas and he extends hospitality to us. Decades after this, the Apostle Paul, who met Jesus on that road to Damascus, he said this: God demonstrates his own love for us, and that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And just a couple of verses later, while we were God's enemies, to reinforce the point, we were reconciled to him through the death of his Son. And what we see in this table is that no one whatsoever is beyond the reach of the love of God. Jesus welcomed his betrayer to his table, and he welcomes us. So Judas the enemy, John the insecure. Then we have Thomas the doubter, finger raised with a question. You can just see him there at Jesus' left. You know, in a fake news world, a world of skepticism and a world of doubt, I think all of us resonate at least a little bit with Thomas. Thomas the doubter. If Peter was the one who impetuously got out of the boat and walked on water, Thomas was the one who, on the shores of Galilee, was checking the boat for leaks before he got in. That was the sort of person that Thomas was. Always asking questions. I read a couple of years ago an article by the British atheist Julian Barnes in The Guardian. He said, "I don't believe in God, but I miss him." Just think about that for a moment. I don't believe in God, but I miss him. I see these articles popping up again and again and again. Just earlier this week, again in The Guardian, another columnist who has no Christian faith whatsoever conceded this point coming out of the COVID pandemic. Life without God is a life without shared meaning. And so we live in this world of doubt and skepticism, a world of fake news, but yet a world yearning, aching for good news. I can't help but think of the words of the greatest, perhaps, of Christian thinkers outside of Scripture, Augustine, who said, "Our hearts will be forever restless until they find their rest in God." There's so much we can learn from the way Jesus interacted with both John and Thomas. I'll continue to unpack the way Jesus interacted with Thomas next week, and also look at Judas, and then finally at Peter. The four disciples that I'm focusing on in this series are known or remembered for very different things. John, the one that Jesus loved. Thomas, the doubter. Judas, the betrayer. And Peter, well, he was the impetuous one. They're all very different characters, and yet we can all learn so much about ourselves, and in particular about God's love through their stories. I'll be back in just a moment.
At Wesley Mission, we see kindness change kids' worlds. You can find out more at wesleymission.org.au. We are here for you.
Thanks again for being a part of the program today. I value this time together, and I hope you do too. I enjoyed the conversation with John Dickson today, and I'm looking forward to next week where I'll continue our conversation with John as we learn more about his media work, his academic work, and his new podcast. Now, if Wesley Mission can be of help to you or a loved one in any way, please do not hesitate to be in touch. Our doors are open 24/7. We are here for you. I hope you can join me again next week on Wesley Impact. Same time, same place. Every blessing to you and those you love.
Wesley Mission walks alongside people of all ages struggling with homelessness, addictions, mental health issues and financial stress. To find out more, visit wesleymission.org.au.